Welcome to the third and final video in this short series on situation ethics. Today, in this one, we're looking at the 4 working principles of situation ethics. And these are basically a set of 4 presuppositions that lie behind the situationist approach to ethics. They're basically 4 basic principles that the situationist has to accept in order to, as true, in order to be a situationist, right? If you disagree with them, you couldn't be a situationist. You have to. These are foundationals. You have to go with them. We remember them as the 3 P's and an R: pragmatism, positivism, personalism, and relativism. So let's start with pragmatism. By pragmatism, Fletcher simply means that all decisions and actions have to be practical. They have to actually work in practice. He's influenced here by the pragmatist philosophers, especially William James. It's important to note, though, that pragmatism for William James is really a theory of truth that is actually quite complicated, and Fletcher is just talking about a really small part of it here. The basic point is that when we are morally deliberating, we decide what the most loving thing to do is in a certain situation, but what we are deciding, right, that might turn out to be quite idealistic and it wouldn't actually work in practice. Right? What we decide might sound good in theory, but in practice it wouldn't work. As a result, it turns out not to be the most loving thing because it wouldn't even be successful. So the principle of pragmatism means that we ought to do the most loving thing that will actually work in the situation. And so Fletcher uses a second example. Fletcher uses the example of a mother who discovers her 13-year-old daughter is having sex. Now, she could respond by forbidding her daughter from having sex and insisting that she conform to the rule not to have underage sex. But possibly the daughter might not listen to that and carry on sneaking off to have sex. So perhaps the most loving thing, perhaps the thing that will actually work, is to provide the daughter with contraception, thereby having a higher chance of preventing pregnancy and disease, rather than advocating abstinence. Positivism. By positivism, Fletcher was referring to a position called Theological Positivism, in which one chooses to accept certain faith propositions, as Fletcher puts it, voluntaristically rather than rationalistically. So when applied to situation ethics, this means that ultimately situation ethics rests upon a foundation of faith rather than on anything that can be proved logically. So specifically, what a situationist is being asked to accept on faith is the idea that agapeic love is the central value that informs our ethical decision making. So the first step for the situationist, says Fletcher, is to give first place to Christian love. We do that on faith without expecting some proof for it, or why the most loving thing is the best thing to do. We don't need any of that. But once we accept it, then we can commit to doing what is right. If you think of it, trying to provide a proof for any ethical foundational thing is very, very tricky. We can't prove why love is a good thing, so Fletcher says, so we have to take that on faith. Personalism. Personalism is the idea that we ought to put people first at the centre of our moral decision making. For Fletcher, ethics is about human relations, so of course our primary concern ought to be humans. Also, love is something that is experienced by people, so therefore we ought to put people first. He contrasts this with legalists. Legalists do not put people first. Legalists are what-askers, he says. So they say, what does the law say? But situationists are who-askers. They say who is to be helped. Finally, the only R in these 4 principles, relativism. And this has nothing to do with relativism in the sense that right and wrong is relative to the individual. Instead, ethical judgments are relative to love. For Fletcher, there are no absolute rules, right? He says that situationists avoid applying words like never, perfect, always, and absolute to moral matters. Situations vary. As a result, what is the most loving thing in one situation, and therefore what is morally right in one situation, may not turn out to be morally right in another situation. It's all to do about what is the most loving thing in the situation.